The roar of 50,000 alien spectators thundered through the Nexus arena as Captain Jake Morrison ducked under a plasma blade that would have taken his head clean off. The weapon sizzled past his ear, leaving the smell of ozone and singed hair in its wake. His opponent, a 7-foot-tall Krellian warrior with 4 arms and skin like polished obsidian, spun the blade in a complex pattern that would have impressed a circus performer back on Earth. Jake rolled to his left, his human reflexes surprisingly quick compared to most species in the galaxy. It was one of the few advantages his kind had in the cosmic arena fights. Humans were unpredictable, desperate, and too stupid to know when they were beaten. At least, that's what the bookmakers always said when they posted the odds. Today, Jake Morrison was a 20-1 underdog against Vorthak the Destroyer. The crowd loved an underdog story, especially when it involved watching a human get torn apart. "Come on, little mammal," Vorthak hissed through his translator collar, his voice carrying the wet sound of someone speaking through too much saliva. "Show me why your species thinks it belongs among the stars." Jake wiped blood from his split lip and grinned. He'd taken worse hits in bar fights back in the asteroid mining colonies. The difference was that those fights didn't have prize money that could buy him a new ship and enough supplies to keep him independent for another year. The arena floor was a circular platform 50 meters across, surrounded by an energy barrier that kept the fighters in and the audience safe. The surface was made of some kind of adaptive metal that could shift its texture and elevation during combat, keeping fights interesting for the paying customers. Right now, it was smooth as glass, giving Jake nowhere to hide from his opponent's superior reach and speed. He dove forward as Vorthak brought down 2 plasma blades in a scissoring motion. The heat washed over Jake's back as he slid between the alien's legs, rolling to his feet and driving his elbow into the back of Vorthak's knee. The joint buckled. Apparently, even 4-armed killing machines had the same basic leg structure as most humanoid species. Vorthak stumbled but caught himself with one hand, spinning to slash at Jake with his remaining weapons. Jake threw himself backward, feeling the blade pass close enough to part the fabric of his combat suit. The crowd's roar intensified. They were getting their money's worth. That's when Jake noticed the disturbance in the VIP section. Even while fighting for his life, years of military training kept him aware of his surroundings. The VIP boxes were arranged in tiers above the main arena seating, each one shielded by privacy screens that kept the occupants hidden from the common spectators. But Jake could see movement in one of the boxes, panic movement. Through the translucent barrier, he caught a glimpse of pale figures in elegant robes surrounding someone who had collapsed. The body language was unmistakable: medical emergency. His enhanced vision, a leftover from his military augmentations, let him pick out details that most humans would have missed. The collapsed figure was small, delicate, wearing what looked like royal garments in deep purple and silver. "Focus, human." Vorthak's blade grazed Jake's shoulder, drawing blood and snapping his attention back to the immediate threat. The alien's 4 arms moved in a coordinated attack pattern that Jake barely managed to avoid. He was getting tired, and Vorthak knew it. Jake feinted left, then dove right, coming up with one of his combat knives in hand. The blade was primitive compared to the high-tech weapons his opponent wielded, but it was sharp enough to penetrate most alien hides. He slashed across Vorthak's wrist, severing tendons and forcing the alien to drop one of his plasma blades. The weapon clattered to the arena floor and automatically deactivated. Jake kicked it away before Vorthak could retrieve it with another hand. "First blood to the human." The announcer's voice boomed across the arena. But can he capitalize on this small advantage? Jake circled his opponent, breathing hard. Vorthak was favoring his injured arm, but he still had 3 functional limbs and 2 plasma blades. The alien's black eyes fixed on Jake with new respect and considerably more anger. "You fight well for a primitive," Vorthak admitted, flexing his wounded hand experimentally. "But you cannot win. My people have been warriors for 10,000 years. Yours barely left their dirtball a century ago." "Yeah, well," Jake panted, "we're fast learners." He was about to launch another attack when the commotion in the VIP box reached a new level of urgency. Through the barrier, Jake could see robed figures arguing with what looked like medical personnel. The collapsed figure hadn't moved. Something about the scene triggered Jake's protective instincts. Maybe it was the military training that had been beaten into him during his years as a colonial marine. Maybe it was the memory of watching helpless people die while he could do nothing to save them. Or maybe it was just human stubborn contrariness, the same trait that made his species charge into situations that saner beings would avoid. Whatever it was, Jake made a decision that would change everything. He threw his knife at Vorthak, not to kill, but to distract. The alien deflected it easily with one of his plasma blades, exactly as Jake had expected. While Vorthak was focused on the thrown weapon, Jake sprinted toward the arena wall. The crowd's roar turned to confused murmurs as Jake began climbing the energy barrier. The barrier wasn't meant to be climbed, it was supposed to be an impenetrable wall. But human military augmentations included gecko-like grips on the hands and feet, designed for zero-gravity operations and hostile environment exploration. "What is the human doing?" the announcer shouted over the crowd noise. "This is highly irregular. Security, contain the fighter." Jake hauled himself up the barrier's surface, his enhanced grip finding purchase on the energy field's framework. Below him, Vorthak roared in frustration at being denied his victory. Arena security was scrambling, but they hadn't expected a fighter to try escaping upward. The VIP box was only 30 meters above the arena floor, an easy climb for someone with Jake's augmentations. He could hear voices from inside the box as he approached, speaking in the melodic language of the Sanguinari, the vampire nobility that ruled half the galaxy. Jake hauled himself over the box's barrier and dropped inside, startling the occupants. There were 6 Sanguinari in the box, all wearing the elaborate robes that marked them as high nobility. 5 of them immediately bared their fangs and hissed at the intrusion. The 6th lay unconscious on a medical gurney that had been hastily brought in. She was beautiful in the way that all Sanguinari were beautiful, perfectly symmetrical features, skin like polished marble, hair that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. But she was also clearly dying. Her skin had a grayish pallor that Jake had seen before on blood loss victims, and her breathing was so shallow it was barely visible. "Get away from the princess," one of the nobles snarled, lunging toward Jake with claws extended. Jake didn't think. He reacted on instinct, the same protective impulse that had made him a good soldier and a terrible civilian. He intercepted the attacking noble with a move that sent the Sanguinari sprawling across the box's floor. "She needs blood," Jake said, looking down at the dying princess. It wasn't a question. He'd seen enough battlefield casualties to recognize extreme blood loss. "Obviously, you ignorant primate," another noble spat. "But our kind can only survive on Sanguinari blood, and there are none of appropriate purity available. She will die, and there is nothing to be done." Jake looked at the princess again. She couldn't have been more than the equivalent of 20 human years, despite probably being centuries old. Her face, even unconscious and gray with impending death, held a quiet dignity that reminded him of his sister back on Earth. His sister, who had died in a mining accident while Jake was off playing soldier in the galaxy's outer rim. "What about human blood?" Jake asked. The noble stared at him as if he'd suggested using contaminated water from a sewer. "Human blood?" The first noble laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Human blood is worthless to us. Crude, primitive, lacking in the refined qualities that sustain our kind." "But it's still blood," Jake pressed. "And she's dying." "Better death than contamination," another noble declared. Jake looked down at the princess again. Her lips had a blue tinge that meant oxygen deprivation. Whatever their prejudices about human blood, she would be dead in minutes without transfusion. He pulled out his combat knife and drew it across his palm before anyone could stop him. Dark red blood welled up immediately, human blood that every species in the galaxy considered inferior, primitive, barely useful for anything. "What are you doing?" the first noble demanded. Jake didn't answer. Instead, he knelt beside the princess and let his blood drip onto her lips. The nobles started forward to stop him, but something made them freeze. The princess's lips moved slightly as Jake's blood touched them. Her breathing, which had been growing steadily weaker, suddenly strengthened. Color began to return to her pale cheeks, not the normal white of Sanguinari skin, but a faint pink blush that made her look almost human. "Impossible," someone whispered. The princess's eyes fluttered open. They were the deep purple of Sanguinari nobility, but, as Jake watched, flecks of brown appeared in them, brown like human eyes. She looked up at Jake with an expression of confusion that quickly shifted to wonder. "You," she said in perfect standard Galactic, her voice carrying a musical quality that made Jake's chest tighten. "You gave me your blood." "You needed it," Jake said simply, applying pressure to his cut palm to stop the bleeding. She sat up slowly, moving with a grace that seemed both vampire elegant and somehow more natural than before. The grayish pallor was completely gone now, replaced by healthy color that made her look alive in a way that no sanguinari ever did. I feel. She paused, as if searching for words to describe something unprecedented. Different. Stronger. More complete. The nobles around them were backing away now, their expressions ranging from horror to fascination. Jake didn't understand the politics of vampire nobility, but he could recognize fear when he saw it. Princess Lyralii, one of the nobles said carefully, "How do you feel? Are you, yourself?" She turned to look at the speaker, and Jake saw something in her purple-brown eyes that made his breath catch. Intelligence, yes, but also a warmth that he'd never seen in any sanguinari before. They were beautiful, elegant, powerful, but cold as deep space. This princess looked at her companion with something approaching affection. "I am myself," she said. "But more than I was." She turned back to Jake. "What is your name, human?" "Jake Morrison. Captain, formerly of the Colonial Marines." "Captain Jake Morrison," she repeated, as if tasting his name. "You have given me life. By the ancient laws of my people, that creates a debt that can never be repaid." One of the nobles stepped forward, clearly struggling with something. "Princess, with respect, the ancient laws apply to debts between sanguinari. This human is not of our kind." Princess Lyralii stood up, moving with a fluid grace that was definitely vampire but somehow warmer than Jake had ever seen from her species. "Is he not?" she asked quietly. "His blood flows in my veins now. His life essence has become part of mine." "By what right do you say he is not of our kind?" The noble had no answer for that. Arena security finally caught up with Jake's unauthorized climb. Armed guards poured into the VIP box, weapons trained on the human who had disrupted the evening's entertainment. Jake tensed, ready to fight his way out if necessary, but Princess Lyralii stepped between him and the guards. "Lower your weapons," she commanded, and her voice carried the kind of authority that made even hardened security personnel obey without thinking. "This human is under my protection." "Princess," the guard captain said carefully, "arena regulations require that escaped fighters be returned to." "I am Princess Lyralii of House Nocturnos, first daughter of the Sanguinari High Council," she interrupted, her voice carrying enough power to make the air itself seem to vibrate. "This human saved my life at great personal risk. He is now under my personal protection, and any who would harm him will answer to me." The guards looked uncertain. Jake could see them trying to balance arena regulations against the word of sanguinari royalty. In the end, royalty won. "Of course, Princess," the captain said, holstering his weapon. "How would you like us to proceed?" "Captain Morrison will be coming with me," Lyralii said. She turned to Jake. "That is, if you consent to be my guest." Jake looked around the VIP box at the assembled nobles, all of whom were staring at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. He thought about his ship, probably being impounded in the arena's docking bay. He thought about the prize money he'd just walked away from. He thought about the simple life of a mercenary pilot, moving from job to job without getting involved in politics or nobility or ancient debts. Then, he looked at Princess Lyralii, with her purple-brown eyes and the grateful smile that made her look less like an ethereal vampire and more like someone who might actually care about him as a person. "I guess I could stay for a while," he said. As they left the arena together, Princess Lyralii walking beside him like an equal rather than a superior, the noble entourage following at a respectful distance, Jake wondered what he'd just gotten himself into. He'd saved a vampire princess with human blood, and apparently that meant something significant in their culture. Behind them, the arena announcer was still trying to explain to the confused crowd why the evening's main event had ended with the human fighter climbing out of the ring and disappearing into the VIP section. Bookmakers were frantically trying to figure out how to pay out bets on a fight that had ended without a clear winner. But Jake wasn't thinking about any of that. He was thinking about the way Princess Lyralii had looked at him when she'd awakened, like he was someone worth saving in return. In a galaxy that considered humans barely above trained animals, that look was worth more than any prize money. He just hoped he would live long enough to figure out what it meant. The Nocturnos family palace was a monument to power that had been built over centuries of conquest and political maneuvering. Jake had seen impressive architecture before, the crystal spires of New Geneva, the floating cities of the Altarian system, but nothing had prepared him for the sheer overwhelming presence of the vampire stronghold. The palace rose from the planet's surface like a black crystal mountain, its walls seeming to absorb light rather than reflect it. Towers twisted skyward in patterns that hurt to look at directly, following geometric principles that human minds weren't meant to process. As their transport approached the main landing platform, Jake could see other ships coming and going, sleek vessels that moved with the predatory grace typical of sanguinary design.
First time seeing a great house palace? Princess Lyralii asked from beside him.
She'd been quiet during the journey from the arena, but Jake had noticed her stealing glances at him when she thought he wasn't looking.
First time seeing anything like this, Jake admitted.
Human colonies tend toward practical architecture. This looks like someone built a nightmare out of black metal and dark dreams. Instead of taking offense, Lyralii laughed, a sound that was musical and warm in a way that no vampire laugh should be.
My ancestors would have taken that as a compliment. House Nocturnos has always prided itself on inspiring fear in our enemies.
Their transport settled onto the landing platform with barely a whisper of sound. Jake could see figures waiting for them, more sanguinary nobility, judging by their elaborate robes and the way they held themselves with unconscious arrogance. Behind them stood ranks of houseguards in midnight black armor that seemed to bend light around its edges.
Should I be worried about the reception committee? Jake asked. Probably, Lyralii said with what might have been humor.
Word travels fast in the palace. By now, everyone knows that the first daughter was saved by human blood.
That's going to make certain people very nervous.
Jake checked his weapons out of habit, then remembered that arena security had confiscated them before the fight. He was walking into a vampire stronghold completely unarmed, depending entirely on the protection of a princess he'd just met. In his military days, his sergeant would have called that poor tactical planning.
Will your father be among the welcoming party? Jake asked as the transport's door hissed open.
Lyralii's expression grew carefully neutral.
Most likely.
Prince Valdris doesn't like surprises, and bringing a human into the heart of House Nocturnos is definitely a surprise. They stepped out onto the landing platform together. The air here was thinner than Jake was used to, with a metallic taste that suggested the planet's atmosphere had been artificially maintained for centuries. The gravity was slightly lower than Earth normal, making him feel oddly light on his feet. The reception committee approached with the measured pace of a funeral procession. At their head walked a vampire who could only be Prince Valdris. He had the same elegant bone structure as his daughter, but where Lyralii's features suggested warmth beneath the perfection, her father's face was carved from ice. His eyes were the deep purple of pure sanguinary bloodline, without the brown flecks that Jake had noticed in his daughter's gaze. "Daughter," Prince Valdris said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made lesser beings kneel reflexively. "You have caused quite a stir this evening." "Father," Lyralii replied with a formal bow that somehow managed to suggest respect without subservience.
"I live because of this human's generosity.
I present Captain Jake Morrison, who gave his blood to save my life." Prince Valdris turned his attention to Jake, and the human felt the weight of centuries of predatory evolution focused on him. This was what it felt like to be studied by something that could kill him without effort, not just physically, but with political power that could erase him from existence with a word. "Captain Morrison," the prince said carefully.
"My daughter's life is precious beyond measure to House Nocturnos.
If you have truly saved her, then you have our gratitude."
Jake heard the unspoken but in that statement. "I did what anyone would do," he said.
"She was dying, and I had something that might help."
"Ah, but that's where you're wrong," said another voice from the reception committee.
A vampire with silver hair and robes that marked him as some kind of court advisor stepped forward. "What you did was unprecedented. In 3,000 years of recorded sanguinary history, there has never been a successful transfusion between our species and any other."
"Until tonight," Lyralii said quietly.
The advisor, Jake caught his name as Counselor Thane during the introductions, nodded gravely.
"Until tonight."
Which raises fascinating questions about the nature of Captain Morrison's blood, and what changes this transfusion may have wrought in our princess.
Jake didn't like the way Thane was looking at him.
It reminded him of the expression scientists wore when they'd found an interesting specimen to dissect.
"What kind of changes?" he asked. "Unknown," Prince Valdris replied.
"Which is why you will be remaining as our guest while we determine the implications of what has occurred." The way he said guest made it clear that Jake's departure would not be entirely voluntary.
Jake had been in enough military briefings to recognize when orders were being presented as requests.
"I appreciate the hospitality," Jake said carefully, "but I have a ship to maintain and cargo runs to complete.
I can't stay indefinitely."
I'm afraid your ship has already been impounded by arena security as collateral for your breach of contract, Thane said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes.
You did forfeit the match by leaving the arena. Jake felt the trap closing around him.
His ship was his livelihood, his freedom, and his only way off this vampire-controlled world. Without it, he was dependent entirely on sanguinary charity, which, based on their reputation, was likely to be limited. However, Prince Valdris continued, House Nocturnos is prepared to purchase your vessel from the arena authorities and restore it to you, along with appropriate compensation for your time as our guest.
In exchange for what? Jake asked. Cooperation with our researchers, Thane said. We need to understand what happened during the transfusion.
The implications for our species could be profound.
Jake looked at Princess Lyralii, trying to read her expression.
She was watching the exchange with obvious concern, but he couldn't tell if she was worried about him or about her family's political maneuvering. The choice is yours, Prince Valdris said.
But I should mention that your current legal status is somewhat precarious.
Breach of arena contract, assault on sanguinary nobility during your entry into the VIP box, potential disruption of public order. These are serious charges in our legal system. Charges that would disappear if I become a willing guest of House Nocturnos, Jake said dryly.
Precisely. Jake had been outmaneuvered by experts, and he knew it.
The smart play would be to accept their terms, submit to whatever tests they wanted to run, and hope they would honor their promise to let him go eventually.
It's what any reasonable person would do.
Unfortunately, Jake's military record contained numerous notations about his tendency to make unreasonable decisions. I'll stay, he said, but I want to be treated as a guest, not a prisoner. I keep my personal effects, I'm not confined to quarters, and I can speak with Princess Lyralii whenever I choose. Agreed, Prince Valdris said without hesitation, which made Jake wonder what he just missed. They were escorted into the palace proper through corridors that seemed designed to intimidate visitors. The walls were covered in tapestries depicting sanguinary victories over various alien species, including, Jake noticed, several scenes of human colonies being conquered. The message was not subtle. Jake's quarters turned out to be a suite larger than most ships, decorated in the flowing sanguinary style that emphasized curves and organic shapes. Everything was in shades of deep purple and silver, from the furniture to the artwork on the walls. A large window looked out over the palace gardens, where strange plants grew in patterns that followed no earthly logic.
Your belongings from the arena have been delivered, Princess Lyralii said as she showed him around the suite. Along with appropriate clothing for palace life. Meaning what I'm wearing now isn't appropriate?
She gestured at his arena combat suit, which was torn in several places and stained with blood, both his and Vorthax's.
My people place great importance on appearance. What you wear communicates your status and intentions.
Jake looked in one of the wardrobes and found clothes that had obviously been tailored for him, formal robes in human proportion sizes, cut from fabric that felt like liquid shadow.
How did they get my measurements so quickly? Sanguinari are efficient when properly motivated, Lyralii said. My father wants you comfortable and cooperative. And what do you want?
The question seemed to catch her off guard.
She was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at the alien garden below.
When she spoke, her voice was softer than before. I want to understand what happened to me, she said.
Since the transfusion, I feel different. Not just physically, but mentally. Emotionally.
Things that never mattered to me before seem important now.
Like what?
She turned to look at him directly, and Jake saw something in her purple-brown eyes that made his breath catch. Like the fact that you saved my life expecting nothing in return.
In sanguinary culture, every action has a political calculation behind it. But you gave me your blood simply because I needed it. That's what decent people do, Jake said.
Yes, she agreed quietly.
But I never understood that before. I never felt the importance of simple decency. Now I do, and I don't know if that's because of your blood or because of you.
Before Jake could respond to that, someone knocked on the suite's door. Lyralii moved to answer it, revealing a servant in house colors. Princess, the servant said with a deep bow, Prince Valdris requests Captain Morrison's presence in the private dining hall.
Dinner will be served shortly. Of course, Lyralii said. Tell my father we'll be along presently. After the servant left, she turned back to Jake.
A word of advice about dinner with my family: sanguinary table manners are complex and easy to violate accidentally.
But, more importantly, everything said at a family meal is considered formal discourse. My father will be evaluating you. Evaluating me for what?
To determine if you're a threat to House Nocturnos, she said simply.
And, if you are, what kind of threat you might be?
Jake considered this as he changed into the formal robes that had been provided. The fabric was surprisingly comfortable, and it fit him perfectly, another sign of sanguinary efficiency. But the cut and style made him look less like a human mercenary and more like someone who might belong in a vampire palace. The private dining hall turned out to be an intimate space compared to the palace's public areas, a room that could seat maybe 20 people around a table carved from what looked like a single piece of black crystal. Prince Valdris sat at the head of the table, with spaces for Jake and Lyralii arranged carefully to facilitate conversation.
Captain Morrison, Prince Valdris said as they entered, I trust your quarters are satisfactory?
More than satisfactory, thank you, Jake replied, taking the seat that had been indicated for him. The meal that followed was unlike anything Jake had ever experienced. Sanguinary cuisine seemed to focus on subtle flavors and artistic presentation rather than nutrition, which made sense, since they sustained themselves primarily on blood rather than food. Each course was a work of art that happened to be edible. More importantly, the conversation was a carefully orchestrated dance of questions and revelations. Prince Valdris asked about Jake's background, his military service, his current work as a mercenary pilot. On the surface, it seemed like polite dinner conversation. But Jake could feel the calculation behind each question, the way his answers were being analyzed for useful information. Your military record is interesting, Prince Valdris said during the third course.
Colonial Marines, Special Operations Division.
Commendations for valor under fire, but also disciplinary actions for insubordination.
I had trouble following orders that didn't make sense, Jake said.
Such as? Jake hesitated, then decided honesty was probably safer than evasion. Orders to abandon civilians during evacuations.
Orders to retreat when we could have saved people.
I joined the military to protect human colonies, not to sacrifice them for political convenience.
Prince Valdris exchanged a glance with his daughter. An admirable sentiment. But surely you understand that leaders must sometimes make difficult decisions for the greater good?
I understand the theory, Jake said. But I've seen too many times when greater good was just an excuse for cowardice or politics.
And what happened when you refused such orders? Court-martial. Dishonorable discharge. Loss of pension and benefits. Jake met the prince's gaze steadily.
Worth it, though.
I can live with being broke. I couldn't live with abandoning people who needed help.
Another glance passed between father and daughter. This time, Jake caught something that might have been approval in Lyralii's expression. Tell me about the transfusion, Prince Valdris said, changing subjects with the smoothness of an experienced interrogator.
What made you think human blood might be compatible with sanguinary physiology?
I didn't know if it would work, Jake admitted. But she was dying, and trying something was better than watching her die.
Even though failure might have killed her faster? Even though.
Prince Valdris leaned back in his chair, studying Jake with those cold purple eyes. You gambled with my daughter's life based on intuition and sentiment. I saved your daughter's life, Jake replied quietly.
Whatever my reasons, that's what happened. The silence that followed was thick with tension. Jake could feel the weight of sanguinary political calculation pressing down on the conversation. Finally, Prince Valdris nodded slightly.
Yes, he said.
You did. And, for that, House Nocturnos owes you a debt that cannot be easily repaid.
I don't want payment, Jake said. I want to understand what happened as much as you do. But I won't be treated like a prisoner or a laboratory specimen.
Then, we understand each other, Prince Valdris said. Tomorrow, you'll meet with our researchers.
They'll explain what we've learned about the transfusion and what questions remain.
You'll submit to testing, within reasonable limits.
In return, you'll be treated as a guest of House Nocturnos until we determine the full implications of what has occurred. It wasn't the freedom Jake wanted, but it was better than a cell.
Agreed.
As dinner concluded and they prepared to leave, Princess Lyralii touched Jake's arm gently. Walk with me, she said.
There are things about the palace you should know.
They left Prince Valdris in the dining hall and walked through corridors that Jake was already beginning to recognize. The palace was vast, but it followed logical patterns that made navigation possible for someone with military training.
Your father doesn't trust me, Jake said as they walked. My father doesn't trust anyone, Lyralii replied.
But he's intrigued by you.
That's actually more dangerous than simple distrust. How so?
If he just distrusted you, he would have you killed quietly and efficiently. But you've presented him with a puzzle, and my father loves puzzles.
He'll keep you alive as long as you remain interesting.
They stopped at a balcony that overlooked the palace's central courtyard. Below, Jake could see Sanguinari going about their evening activities, elegant figures moving through gardens that existed in defiance of the planet's hostile environment.
What happens when I stop being interesting? Jake asked.
Lyralii was quiet for a long moment. I won't let that happen, she said finally.
Why not?
She turned to look at him, and, in the soft light from the palace interior, her eyes seemed more brown than purple.
Because you saved my life expecting nothing in return. Because you're the first person I've ever met who acts from simple decency rather than calculation. Because.
She paused, as if the next words were difficult to say.
Because since the transfusion, I think I'm beginning to understand what humans call affection. And I think what I feel for you might be important.
Jake stared at her, trying to process what she just said. A vampire princess was telling him that his blood had changed her in ways that went beyond the physical, had given her emotions that her species normally didn't experience. That's probably the most dangerous thing you could have told me, he said quietly.
I know, she replied. But I think you deserved honesty.
As they stood together on the balcony, looking out over an alien palace on a world where humans were considered barely above animals, Jake realized that his simple act of compassion had set in motion forces that neither of them fully understood. He'd saved a vampire princess with human blood, and now she was changing in ways that could reshape the politics of the galaxy. The smart thing would be to find a way to escape, to get off this world before the situation became even more complicated. But, looking at Princess Lyralii, at the warmth in her eyes and the genuine emotion in her voice, Jake found himself thinking that maybe, for once in his life, he didn't want to do the smart thing. Maybe he wanted to see what happened when a human and a vampire tried to build something together in defiance of everything the galaxy believed about their species. Jake woke to the sound of artificial dawn breaking over the Sanguinari homeworld. The palace's windows were programmed to gradually brighten, mimicking a sunrise that never came naturally to this dark planet. For a moment, he forgot where he was. The bed was too comfortable, the air too clean, the silence too complete compared to the constant hum of ship engines he was used to. Then, memory returned, the arena fight, the dying princess, the blood transfusion that had saved her life and trapped him in vampire politics. He sat up, noting that someone had left breakfast on a table by the window, food that looked human familiar rather than the artistic presentations from last night's dinner. The door chimed softly, and Jake called for whoever it was to enter. He expected a servant, but, instead Princess Lyralii stepped into the room. She was dressed differently than the night before, simpler robes in dark blue rather than formal palace attire, and her hair was pulled back in a practical style rather than the elaborate arrangements favored by Sanguinari nobility. "Good morning," she said. "I wanted to escort you to the research facility personally. Nervous about leaving me alone with your family's scientists?" Jake asked as he reached for the clothes that had been laid out for him, practical garments this time, more suited for whatever tests they had planned. "Nervous about how they might treat you," Lyralii admitted. "Sanguinari researchers can be intense when they encounter something unprecedented." Jake finished dressing and joined her at the window. The view showed him more of the palace grounds in daylight, gardens that followed no earthly logic, buildings that seemed to grow from the planet's surface rather than being constructed on it. In the distance, he could see other structures that might have been cities, connected by transport tubes that arced through the atmosphere. "Has anyone ever left House Nocturnos once they became a guest?" Jake asked. "Several times," Lyralii said. "Though usually not alive." "Comforting." "Jake." She turned to face him, and he saw something in her expression that hadn't been there the night before, a kind of fierce determination that reminded him of soldiers preparing for battle. "I need you to know that whatever happens today, whatever they discover about the transfusion, I won't let them treat you as a test subject." "Even if it means going against your father?" "Even then, dot." The research facility was located in a section of the palace that Jake hadn't seen before, more utilitarian than the living areas, with corridors of polished metal and lighting that favored function over atmosphere. They passed through multiple security checkpoints, each one scanning both visitors with technology that made Jake's skin tingle.
Bioelectric analysis, Lyrelii explained as they walked.
Checking for weapons, recording devices, anything that might contaminate the research environment.
Or anything that might help me escape?
That too. The lead researcher turned out to be Dr. Kalen Vorth, a vampire who looked ancient even by sanguinary standards. His hair was silver white, his skin had the translucent quality of aged paper, and his purple eyes held the kind of intelligence that came from centuries of accumulated knowledge.
Captain Morrison, Dr. Vorth said as they entered his laboratory.
I have been studying sanguinary physiology for over 600 years.
What happened between you and Princess Lyrelii should have been impossible.
The laboratory was a gleaming space filled with equipment that Jake didn't recognize but that looked expensive and probably dangerous. Medical beds equipped with scanning devices, analysis machines that hummed with barely contained energy, storage units that held samples in conditions that made Jake's augmented vision register warning signs.
Should have been, Jake said, but wasn't. So what does that tell you about sanguinary physiology?
Dr. Vorth's eyes lit up with the kind of enthusiasm that made Jake distinctly nervous.
Precisely the question I intend to answer.
Princess, if you would take position on scanner bed 1, we'll begin with analyzing the changes to your blood chemistry. Lyrelii moved to the indicated bed without hesitation, lying back as mechanical arms descended to position scanning devices around her. Jake watched screens come alive with data streams that meant nothing to him but that clearly excited the research team. Fascinating, Dr. Vorth murmured as readings flowed across his displays. Princess, your blood chemistry has changed dramatically since last night. The basic sanguinary markers are still present, but they've been augmented by compounds that shouldn't exist in our physiology.
What kind of compounds? Lyrelii asked. Iron-based oxygen carriers, for one thing.
Your blood now has nearly double the oxygen-carrying capacity of normal sanguinary blood. Enhanced clotting factors that would make you nearly impossible to bleed out. Antibody structures that look adapted for fighting diseases that our species has never encountered. Jake stepped closer to look at the displays. Even without understanding the technical details, he could see that the readings were dramatically different from whatever baseline they were using for comparison.
It's like your blood is becoming optimized, one of the research technicians said.
Taking the best traits from both species.
And my strength? Lyrelii asked.
I feel stronger than before. Your muscle density has increased by approximately 15%, Dr. Vorth confirmed.
Your reflexes are faster. Your sensory acuity is enhanced across all spectrums.
Captain Morrison's blood didn't just save your life, it improved your capabilities beyond what either species can achieve alone. The room fell quiet as the implications sank in.
Jake could see the wheels turning in Dr. Vorth's ancient mind, already calculating what this discovery might mean for sanguinary society.
Now, Captain Morrison, Dr. Vorth said, turning his attention to Jake.
We need to understand what makes your blood special. Please take position on scanner bed 2.
Jake hesitated. Military training had taught him to be suspicious of anyone who wanted to stick needles in him, especially when they were obviously excited about the results. But Lyrelii nodded encouragingly from her own scanner bed, and he realized he had little choice in the matter. The scanning process was more invasive than Jake had expected. Beyond the basic medical readings, the sanguinary technology seemed designed to analyze him at the cellular level. He could feel energy passing through his body, mapping everything from his bone density to his neural activity. Remarkable, Dr. Vorth said as Jake's readings populated the displays.
Captain, are you aware that your blood chemistry is significantly different from baseline human norms? Different how? Enhanced metabolic efficiency, for one thing.
Your cells process nutrients and oxygen at rates that would be superhuman by your species standards. Your immune system shows adaptations that suggest exposure to environments that would be lethal to most humans.
And your blood contains trace elements that I cannot identify.
Jake thought about his years in the colonial marines, about the frontier worlds where he'd served and the things he'd been exposed to.
I've been to a lot of places that weren't friendly to human life. Military medicine did what was necessary to keep me functional.
This goes beyond military augmentation, Dr. Vorth insisted. Your blood shows signs of fundamental genetic modification, changes that would normally take generations to develop through natural selection.
One of the technicians looked up from her displays with excitement.
Dr. Vorth, look at the compatibility analysis. The main screen shifted to show a complex diagram that appeared to be modeling how Jake's blood interacted with sanguinary physiology. Even Jake could see that the interaction patterns were remarkably stable. His blood wasn't being rejected or broken down, but was somehow integrating with Lyraliai's existing biology. It's like they were designed to be compatible, the technician said in amazement. Impossible, Dr. Vorth said automatically, but Jake could see doubt creeping into his expression. The probability of natural compatibility between species that evolved on different worlds would be astronomical. Unless it wasn't natural, Jake said quietly. Everyone in the laboratory turned to look at him. Jake sat up on the scanner bed, his mind racing as pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known existed began to fall into place. What do you mean? Lyraliai asked. Jake took a deep breath, knowing that what he was about to say would probably sound insane. What if humans and sanguinari aren't as different as everyone thinks? What if we share common origins that have been forgotten? Dr. Vortha's laugh was sharp and dismissive. Captain, human evolution is well documented. Your species developed on Earth from primitive primates. Sanguinari civilization is over 10,000 years old and has always been based on this world. Always? Jake pressed. Or just as long as your records go back? The laughter died on Dr. Vortha's lips. For someone who had lived for centuries, the suggestion that sanguinari history might be incomplete was clearly troubling. There are gaps in the earliest records, one of the younger researchers said quietly. The first few centuries of our civilization are poorly documented. We've always assumed it was due to primitive record-keeping methods. What if it was something else? Jake asked. What if both our species originated somewhere else, and, over time we forgot our common heritage? Preposterous, Dr. Vorth said, but his voice lacked conviction. Is it? Lyraliai sat up on her scanner bed, her purple-brown eyes bright with interest. It would explain the compatibility. It would explain why my transformation has been so stable. Jake could see the research team struggling with the implications. If humans and sanguinari shared common origins, it would revolutionize everything the galaxy thought it knew about species development and interstellar politics. We need more data, Dr. Vorth said finally. Captain, I'll need additional blood samples for detailed genetic analysis. Princess, we'll need to monitor your continued development. This research could take weeks. Weeks? Jake had been hoping to be off this world within days. At minimum. Possibly months, depending on what we discover. Jake looked at Princess Lyraliai, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. The smart thing would be to demand his ship and leave immediately, before he got any more entangled in vampire politics and ancient mysteries. There's something else, Lyraliai said before Jake could speak. Something I haven't told anyone yet. She stood up from the scanner bed and walked to one of the laboratory's mirrors. Jake watched as she concentrated, and her appearance began to change. The pale sanguinari skin warmed to something closer to human flesh tone. The ethereal bone structure softened slightly. The fangs retracted until they were barely visible. I can look human now, she said quietly. With concentration, I can alter my appearance to match your species almost perfectly. The research team stared in shock. Jake felt his breath catch as he realized the implications. If Lyraliai could pass for human, then, the boundaries between their species were even more fluid than anyone had imagined. When did this ability manifest? Dr. Vorth asked, his scientific excitement warring with obvious concern. This morning, Lyraliai replied. I was thinking about Jake, about how different we looked, and, suddenly, I could feel my appearance shifting. She let the transformation fade, returning to her normal sanguinari appearance. But Jake had seen what she could become, and it changed everything. This proves it, Jake said. We're not separate species. We're variations of the same basic template, separated by time and environment. Dr. Vorth was quiet for a long moment, studying the data streams that continued to flow across his displays. When he finally spoke, his voice held a note of fear that Jake hadn't expected. If you're correct, the ancient researcher said, then, this discovery will shake the foundations of galactic civilization. The sanguinari have built their power on the premise that we are a superior species, naturally dominant over lesser races like humanity. If we're actually cousins, then, a lot of people are going to be very unhappy about the implications, Jake finished.
Before anyone could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the laboratory.
Emergency lighting bathed everything in red, and Jake could hear the sound of running feet in the corridors outside.
"What's happening?" Lyralii demanded.
A security officer burst into the laboratory, his face pale with urgency. "Princess, you and Captain Morrison need to come with me immediately.
Prince Valdris has called an emergency council session." "What kind of emergency?" Jake asked.
"Word of the transfusion has leaked beyond the palace," the officer replied. "There are ships approaching from the other great houses.
Some of them are flying war flags."
Jake and Lyralii exchanged glances. Whatever political forces they had set in motion with a simple act of compassion, those forces were now moving beyond their control.
"How much time do we have?" Lyralii asked. "The first delegations will arrive within hours," the officer said.
"Prince Valdris wants you both in the council chamber before they land."
As they left the laboratory, Jake could hear Dr. Vorth shouting orders to his team about securing the research data.
The scientists' excitement had been replaced by obvious fear of what the other great houses might do if they learned about the discoveries being made in House Nocturnos.
"This is bad, isn't it?"
Jake asked as they hurried through the palace corridors. "Very bad," Lyralii confirmed. "If the other houses think we found a way to enhance sanguinary capabilities using human blood, they'll either demand access to the research or try to destroy it before we can gain an advantage."
"And if they learn that humans and sanguinary might be related?"
Lyralii was quiet for a moment. "Then, they'll probably try to kill you to prevent the knowledge from spreading."
Jake nodded grimly.
He'd walked into a simple arena fight expecting to earn some prize money and move on to the next job. Instead, he'd stumbled into discoveries that could reshape galactic politics or start a war between vampire houses. The only question now was whether he would live long enough to see how it all played out.
The council chamber of House Nocturnos was designed to intimidate.
Jake realized this the moment he stepped through the massive doors that required 6 servants to open.
The circular room rose 30 meters to a domed ceiling painted with scenes of sanguinary conquests across the galaxy.
Tiered seating surrounded a central speaking area where Prince Valdris waited, his formal robes making him look like a figure carved from shadow. But Jake's attention was drawn to the viewing screens that dominated one wall of the chamber.
Each screen showed the approach of different fleets, sleek sanguinary warships that moved through space with predatory grace.
The vessels bore the colors and symbols of the great houses, and even Jake's limited knowledge of vampire politics was enough to recognize some of the most powerful names in the galaxy. "House Drackle," Princess Lyralii murmured beside him as she identified the approaching fleets.
"House Ravencroft. House Bloodmere. Father has summoned the Inner Circle." "Is that good or bad?"
"That depends on whether they're coming as allies or executioners."
Prince Valdris gestured for them to take seats in the family section of the chamber.
Jake noticed that his chair had been positioned to give him a clear view of all entrances, whether for his protection or to make it easier for security to watch him, he wasn't sure. "Before the others arrive," Prince Valdris said, his voice carrying easily through the vast space, "we need to establish our position."
What happened in that arena was witnessed by thousands of beings.
By now, every intelligence network in the galaxy knows that a human saved a sanguinary princess with a blood transfusion.
"What's the official story going to be?" Jake asked. "The truth," Prince Valdris replied, which surprised Jake. "Or at least, a carefully edited version of it.
We'll confirm that you saved Lyralii's life, but we'll be selective about the details of her transformation." The first fleet to arrive belonged to House Drackle, and Jake watched through the viewing screens as their delegation's transport approached the palace. The ship was a work of art that happened to be functional, all flowing curves and dark metal that seemed to absorb light.
Count Dracula himself is leading their delegation, one of Prince Valdris's advisors reported.
Along with his daughter Mina and a full complement of houseguards.
Jake blinked. "Count Dracula? The Count Dracula? You know of him?" Lyralii asked. "Human folklore is full of stories about vampires," Jake explained. "Dracula is one of the most famous names in our mythology." Prince Valdris looked intrigued. "Interesting.
I was unaware that human culture had preserved memories of our kind." Before Jake could explain the difference between folklore and historical memory, the chamber doors opened to admit the delegation from House Drackle. Count Dracula was exactly what Jake had expected and nothing like what he'd imagined, simultaneously tall, pale, aristocratic in the way that all sanguinari were, but carrying himself with an authority that made even Prince Valdris seem like a junior officer.
Mina Dracula followed her father with the fluid grace of a predator.
She was beautiful in the devastating way of vampire nobility, but her eyes held a cold calculation that reminded Jake of a sniper evaluating targets.
Valdris, Count Dracula said with a formal bow that managed to convey respect without subservience. Thank you for calling this gathering.
Recent events require discussion.
More delegations arrived in rapid succession.
House Ravencroft was represented by Lady Selene, a vampire with silver hair and eyes like chips of ice. House Bloodmere sent Duke Victor, whose scarred face told stories of battles fought before humans had left their home world. Other houses followed names that Jake recognized from intelligence briefings during his military service, powers that controlled star systems and commanded fleets that could reduce planets to ash. When all the delegations had assembled, Prince Valdris moved to the center of the chamber's speaking area. Honored representatives of the great houses, he began, we gather to discuss an unprecedented event.
3 days ago, my daughter Princess Lyralii was saved from death by the intervention of a human fighter.
We have heard disturbing reports, Count Dracula said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. Reports that suggest the transfusion was more than a simple medical procedure.
The reports are accurate, Prince Valdris replied. Captain Morrison's blood not only saved my daughter's life, it enhanced her capabilities beyond normal sanguinary parameters.
The chamber erupted in whispered conversations. Jake could see the political calculations racing through the assembled nobility's minds. Enhanced capabilities meant military advantages. Military advantages meant shifts in the balance of power between houses. Demonstrate, Lady Selene commanded, her cold voice cutting through the murmurs. Princess Lyralii stood gracefully and moved to the speaking area beside her father.
Jake watched her take a deep breath, then begin the transformation he'd witnessed in the laboratory.
Her appearance shifted from ethereal vampire beauty to something warmer, more human. When the change was complete, she could have passed for a human noble in any court in the galaxy. The silence that followed was absolute.
Fascinating, Count Dracula said finally. Shape-shifting abilities. Enhanced physical parameters.
Blood that can sustain sanguinary physiology while providing human advantages.
His ancient eyes fixed on Jake. What other surprises might human blood provide? That's what our researchers are attempting to determine, Prince Valdris replied. Duke Victor leaned forward in his seat. And what of the human himself? What are his intentions? His demands? All eyes turned to Jake. He realized that this was his moment. Whatever he said now would determine how the most powerful vampires in the galaxy viewed him and his species.
I don't have any demands, Jake said, standing so that his voice would carry through the chamber. I saw someone dying, and I tried to help. That's all.
That's all? Lady Selene's laugh was like breaking crystal. You expect us to believe that you acted without political calculation? Without thought of personal gain?
I expect you to believe what's true, Jake replied.
In human culture, we help people who need help. We don't always calculate the advantages first.
Crude thinking, Duke Victor said dismissively. But, perhaps useful in its simplicity.
Count Dracula raised a hand for silence. The philosophical implications of human altruism aside, we need to discuss practical matters. House Nocturnos, what do you intend to do with this discovery?
Prince Valdris had been waiting for this question.
We intend to continue research under controlled conditions.
Captain Morrison has agreed to cooperate with our scientists in exchange for appropriate compensation.
And, will this research be shared with the other great houses? Lady Selene asked. Jake could hear the trap in that question. If Prince Valdris said yes, House Nocturnos would lose any advantage they'd gained.
If he said no, the other houses would assume he was planning to use enhanced capabilities against them.
The research will be shared, Prince Valdris said carefully, when we understand its full implications. Premature distribution of incomplete data could be dangerous. Dangerous to whom? Duke Victor demanded.
To the stability of sanguinary civilization, Princess Lyralii said, speaking for the first time since her demonstration.
What if enhancement through human blood comes with unexpected costs? What if the process is irreversible? What if it fundamentally changes what we are as a species? Jake was impressed by her political instincts. She'd shifted the conversation from military advantages to existential questions about sanguinary identity. Valid concerns, Count Dracula acknowledged. But, concerns that could be addressed through careful study by multiple house research teams. Or through hasty experiments that could result in disaster, Princess Lyralii countered. The debate that followed was a masterclass in vampire politics. Each house representative advanced arguments that served their own interests while appearing to consider the greater good. Jake found himself studying the participants, trying to understand the undercurrents of alliance and rivalry that shaped their positions. What became clear was that none of them trusted the others enough to share the research freely, but all of them feared being excluded from it. Perhaps, Count Dracula said during a pause in the debate, we should hear directly from the human. Captain Morrison, what is your assessment of the situation? Jake stood again, aware that every word would be analyzed for hidden meanings he didn't intend. My assessment is that you're all missing the point, he said. The chamber fell silent. Jake could feel the weight of immortal attention focused on him, but he pressed on. You're talking about this like it's a weapon to be controlled or a resource to be exploited. But, what if it's something else entirely? What if it's proof that humans and sanguinari are more similar than anyone realized? Elaborate, Count Dracula commanded. Jake took a breath, knowing he was about to wade into dangerous waters. Your researchers found that my blood integrates with sanguinari physiology too easily for random compatibility. Princess Lyralii can now change her appearance to mimic humans. What if our species share common origins? What if the differences between us are environmental rather than fundamental? The silence that followed was different from before, not just surprise, but shock tinged with fear. Impossible, Lady Selene said, but her voice lacked conviction. Is it? Jake pressed. How far back do your historical records go? Do you know where the first sanguinari came from, or do your records just show them already established on this world? He could see uncomfortable glances being exchanged among the nobility. Jake was hitting close to something they didn't want to acknowledge. Even if true, Duke Victor said, what relevance would ancient history have to current politics? Every relevance, Jake replied. If humans and sanguinari are related, then your entire social structure is built on a false premise. You can't claim natural superiority over a species that's essentially your cousin. The chamber erupted in angry voices. Jake had just challenged the fundamental basis of sanguinari civilization, their belief in their own inherent superiority over other galactic species. Count Dracula's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Silence. When quiet returned, the ancient vampire studied Jake with eyes that had seen the rise and fall of empires. You're suggesting that our entire understanding of species hierarchy is incorrect. I'm suggesting that it's incomplete, Jake corrected. And that maybe it's time to consider new possibilities. Before anyone could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the palace. The viewing screen shifted to show new contacts approaching through space, not the elegant ships of vampire nobility, but crude, functional vessels that Jake recognized as human colonial fleet destroyers. Human warships, one of Prince Valdris's advisors reported with barely concealed panic. A full battle group, approaching at attack speed. Count Dracula's expression darkened. It seems that humanity has decided to take an interest in these proceedings. Jake stared at the screens, trying to understand why colonial fleet ships would be here. Then, he saw the lead vessel's markings and felt his blood run cold. That's the CNS Retribution, he said quietly. Flagship of Admiral Sarah Chen. You know this admiral? Prince Valdris asked. She's my former commanding officer, Jake replied. And if she's here with a battle group, it means someone told the colonial government about the transfusion. Princess Lyralii moved to stand beside Jake, her hand finding his arm. What will she want? Jake watched the human fleet take up positions around the sanguinari homeworld, not close enough to be overtly threatening, but positioned to intercept any ships trying to leave the system. To take me home, he said grimly. Whether I want to go or not. The political situation had just become exponentially more complicated. The great houses were arguing about research sharing and power balances, but now they had to contend with human intervention. And Jake found himself at the center of a crisis that could spark the first war between vampires and humans in galactic history. As if summoned by his thoughts, a communication request appeared on the chamber's main screen.
Admiral Chen's face appeared, her expression as cold and professional as Jake remembered.
"This is Admiral Sarah Chin of the Colonial Fleet," she announced.
"I'm here to retrieve Captain Jake Morrison and ensure that human interests are protected in any discussions regarding this incident."
Count Dracula looked at Jake with something approaching amusement.
"Your species moves quickly when their interests are threatened."
"Admiral Chen doesn't make idle threats," Jake warned.
"If she's here with a battle group, she's prepared to fight if necessary."
Princess Lyraliai's grip on his arm tightened. "And if you go with her?"
Jake looked around the council chamber at the assembled vampire nobility, then back at the screen showing Admiral Chen waiting for a response. He was trapped between two powers that had the capability to destroy each other, and his decision could determine whether they tried. "If I go with her," he said quietly, "then this all becomes a human military secret instead of a vampire one.
And that won't end well for anyone."
The communication channel crackled with tension as Admiral Chan's image dominated the council chamber's main screen. Jake could see his former commanding officer's sharp eyes taking inventory of the assembled vampire nobility, calculating threats and advantages with the precision that had made her the youngest admiral in colonial fleet history. "Captain Morrison," Admiral Chen said, her voice carrying the authority that had once sent Jake charging into hopeless battles.
"You've caused quite a stir back home. Intelligence reports suggest you've become involved in sanguinary internal politics."
"It's more complicated than that, Admiral," Jake replied, stepping forward so she could see him clearly.
"It always is with you," Chen said with what might have been humor.
"Nevertheless, the colonial government has concerns about a human citizen being held on a vampire world, particularly given the unusual circumstances of your arrival here."
Count Dracula rose from his seat, moving with the fluid grace that made all sanguinari look like they were dancing even when walking. "Admiral Chen, I presume?" "I am Count Dracula of House Drackle. Captain Morrison is not being held against his will.
He is a guest of House Nocturno's. A guest who arrived by climbing out of an arena and hasn't been seen in public since," Admiral Chen replied coolly. "Forgive my skepticism, but the colonial government requires proof of Captain Morrison's well-being and his freedom to leave if he chooses."
Jake could feel the political undercurrents shifting around him.
Admiral Chen's arrival had changed the dynamics completely. This was no longer just about vampire internal politics, but about the relationship between two species that had maintained an uneasy peace for decades.
"Admiral," Jake said, "I need you to understand something. What happened here isn't just about me being rescued or held captive. We've discovered something that could change everything we thought we knew about human-vampire relations." "Elaborate."
Jake looked around the council chamber at the assembled vampire nobility, then back at Admiral Chen's image.
"There's evidence suggesting that humans and sanguinari might be related species.
The blood transfusion that saved Princess Lyraliai's life has led to discoveries that challenge everything both our cultures believe about evolutionary biology." Admiral Chen's expression didn't change, but Jake knew her well enough to recognize the slight tightening around her eyes that meant she was processing significant information.
"That's a substantial claim, Captain. What evidence supports it?" Before Jake could answer, Princess Lyraliai stepped into the viewing angle of the communication system.
Admiral Chan's eyes widened slightly as she took in the vampire princess's appearance, and then widened further as Lyraliai began her transformation, shifting from ethereal sanguinary beauty to something that could pass for human nobility. "This is one piece of evidence," Lyraliai said in perfect standard galactic, her appearance now warm and human rather than coldly beautiful. "Since receiving Captain Morrison's blood, I've gained abilities that shouldn't be possible for our species."
Admiral Chen was quiet for a long moment, studying Lyraliai's transformed appearance through the communication link.
"Fascinating," she said finally. "But even if this indicates some form of biological compatibility, it doesn't necessarily prove common origins." "There's more," Jake said. He gestured to Count Dracula, who nodded gravely. "Admiral Chen," the ancient vampire said, "our oldest records speak of a time before our civilization was established on this world. We have always assumed these were myths or corrupted histories. But, given recent discoveries, we are beginning to wonder if they might be memories of a time when our species coexisted elsewhere."
"You're suggesting that both humans and sanguinari originated somewhere other than our current homeworlds?" "We're suggesting it's possible," Prince Valdris interjected, joining the conversation. "And, if true, it has implications that extend far beyond medical curiosity."
Admiral Chan's image flickered slightly as her ship's communication systems processed the encrypted data stream. Jake could see her weighing the political implications. If humans and vampires were related species, it would revolutionize galactic politics and potentially destabilize the careful balance of power that had prevented major wars for generations.
Admiral, Jake said, I need to ask you something. How did you know to come here? Intelligence reports don't usually reach Admiral-level attention within days of an incident. Admiral Chen's expression grew carefully neutral. That information is classified. Is it?
Princess Lyralii asked, her human-like appearance making her question seem less threatening.
Or is it related to human research that your government would prefer to keep secret?
The silence that followed was telling. Jake could see Admiral Chen calculating how much to reveal, and the fact that she was hesitating meant there was something significant to hide.
There have been rumors, Admiral Chen said finally, that human researchers have been investigating biological compatibility with various alien species.
If such research existed, and if news of a successful human sanguinary transfusion reached the wrong ears, it might prompt immediate action to secure the subjects involved.
Jake felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. You're saying the colonial government already knew about the possibility of human-vampire compatibility?
I'm saying that if such knowledge existed, it would be considered a matter of highest security classification.
Count Dracula's laugh was sharp and cold. How very typical.
Both our species have been keeping secrets about our potential relationship.
What other secrets are there?
Lyralii demanded, her transformed appearance making her seem more human than vampire as she voiced the question.
Admiral Chen was quiet for a moment, clearly debating how much to reveal.
There are archaeological sites, she said finally.
Ruins on worlds in the galactic rim that predate both human and sanguinary civilization.
The technology is too advanced to be primitive, but it doesn't match either of our species' developmental patterns.
You think they're from our common ancestors, Jake said. It's one theory among many.
But the artifacts we've recovered show evidence of biotechnology that seems designed for species with both human and sanguinary characteristics. The council chamber erupted in whispered conversations as the vampire nobility absorbed this revelation. Jake could see the political implications racing through their calculations. If there were archaeological sites with evidence of their shared origins, then both species had been lying to themselves about their own histories.
Admiral, Count Dracula said, his ancient voice carrying clearly through the chamber, perhaps it is time for our species to share information rather than continue these separate investigations. That would require authorization from both the colonial government and the Sanguinary High Council, Admiral Chen replied. Then, let us provide it, Prince Valdris said.
The inner circle of great houses has the authority to speak for the sanguinary in matters of species-level importance. Jake watched the political machinery grinding into motion around him. What had started as a simple act of compassion was becoming a diplomatic revolution that could reshape galactic civilization. There's something else we need to consider, Princess Lyralii said, drawing attention back to the immediate situation.
If our species are related, and if that relationship can be reactivated through blood exchange, what does that mean for individuals like me? Admiral Chen's sharp eyes focused on the transformed vampire princess. What changes have you experienced beyond the physical transformation? Emotional changes, Lyralii admitted. Capacities for empathy and attachment that sanguinari don't normally possess. The ability to understand concepts like selfless sacrifice that were alien to me before the transfusion.
You're becoming more human, Admiral Chen observed. I'm becoming more complete, Lyralii corrected.
As if the transfusion restored capabilities that were supposed to be there all along. Jake could see understanding dawning in Admiral Chen's expression.
If the blood exchange was reactivating dormant genetic potential rather than creating new abilities, it suggested that the separation between humans and vampires